Kia ora tātou nau mai haere mai, and welcome to a council meeting of Wednesday the 4th of August 2021. Special welcome back to councillors after recess. And look, this meeting is is being recorded and is on the council's website. It's being live streamed via the council's YouTube channel. We also, I think we have a councillor online from Tokyo as well. In terms of health and safety, and welcome to the members of the public here, in the unlikely event of an emergency, we will evacuate via the green exit signs and to the assembly area of the clock tower in the square, Te Marae Ahine. In terms of health and safety, the building is obviously a non-smoking facility. A defibrillator is located at the front of house on the ground floor, and if there are any incidences, please report them to our committee administrator. If we're speaking, councillors, obviously into the microphone, and please say your name. And we will start with our order of business and apologies. We have an apology received from Councillor Bruno Petrinas. And look, I'll look to move that, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. And I'll open it up for any questions or comments. There being none, we will vote, please. It has passed 14 votes for, none against. Right, moving through to number 2, notification of any additional items. I, as the Chair, have not been notified of anything. There's nothing from the floor. Moving to number 3, declarations of interest, if there are any. Deputy Mayor.
Mr Mayor, just note for item 8 that I will withdraw and not participate for that item.
Okay. All right, moving through to the confirmation of the minutes, number 4 on our order paper. That Council resolves that the public and confidential minutes of the Council meeting of the 7th of July 2021 be confirmed as a true and correct record. I'll look to move those, seconded by the Deputy Mayor. Are there any matters arising? Councillor Johnson.
Mr Mayor, I just want to note that there's been some editorialising of the minutes again. So we've got extra comments in, and I have raised this before. But since all the meetings are recorded and online, I don't see any need for the extra comments, things like the Mayor thanked staff and all of this kind of thing. I just think they're superfluous.
It's noted. Are there any other matters arising? Okay, there being none, we will vote, please. And that has passed 13 votes for and 1 against. Right, we'll move through to number 5, which is a report from our governance manager around response to the Greater Bunnythorpe Community Proposal. Hannah, would you like to speak to that, councillors? Page 27 of your papers.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Morena koutou. You have 2 reports today on the representation arrangements for our city. The first is a response to the Greater Bunnythorpe Community Proposal. This report is to be dealt with under the Local Government Act and is as the result of the proposal received by the Council, which needs your decision today. The second is the representation review, and that's being dealt with under the Local Electoral Act, and that's as a consequence of introducing Māori wards that Palmerston North City now needs to have an early representation review. So to the first report, the response to the Greater Bunnythorpe Community Proposal, You'll be aware, as it was circulated earlier, that 112 eligible residents have requested that Palmerston North City Council constitute a community of Greater Bunnythorpe and establish a community board. It's a political decision today on how to proceed with that. The two options before you are that Council give effect to the proposal. In doing so, Council is stating that the Greater Bunnythorpe community exists as a community, it's separate from the city, has needs that are not being met by the current community groups and current connections with Council, and that those needs could be met through a community board. And the other option is that the Council rejects the proposal. In doing so, Council is stating that Greater Bunnythorpe is not a cohesive community distinct from the city-wide community of Palmerston North. This option rests on Council's responsibility for the whole city and a unified identity of Palmerston North. Happy to take any questions.
Thank you, Hannah. I'll open it up for any questions. There are some. Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and thank you, Hannah, for the report. I have two questions. Number one is, I understand from the other report that the number of Maori member or elected members in future depends upon the total population of the area or the ratio. I'm talking about an ideal condition. If we say yes to this community board, will that affect that representation number?
No.
Okay, thank you. And number two, the estimates of the expected cost of creating this community board, $70,000, is that a definite figure or just a guesstimate or estimate?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it is certainly an estimate. The reason it's an estimate is the Remuneration Authority themselves set the remuneration for the community board members. We don't do that. So I've made an estimate based on what I would expect the authority to set. Staff administration costs in general, I think I can estimate pretty well. But with regard to how much delegation the council would give the community board, that would then depend on the amount of funding you would like that community board to have to be able to work with. So that amount, again, is an estimate at this stage.
Just one related to the same. And this cost will be put onto the community board, what do you call, the members of the local community, this cost?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, at this stage that decision hasn't been made by the council, so the cost would certainly need to be covered by the council, but how that was funded is yet to be determined.
Right, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah, for the report. Couple questions. I guess the first really is if we were to go through to consult, what our options might be then, hearing from that consultation.
By giving effect to the proposal, you are stating that you will have a community board. What you're consulting on is finding out from the wider community what shape that community board should take. Have I answered your question, Councillor?
Quite clearly, thank you. If it's possible, can you differentiate then or help us understand, in the wider representation review, we talked about putting an initial proposal to the community and the ability to shape that, whereas here the language is about give effect to and stating that there is. It seems quite strong to need to jump into that level before having consulted with the wider community.
So, as I said in my opening comments, this proposal has been considered under the Local Government Act. So where the community, the people that have signed the proposal have come together and said to the council, we'd like you to consider us as a community and give us a community board. The Local Electoral Act, as part of the representation review, requires councils every time they do a representation review to consider community boards. So they are two separate processes with two different ways of following, and the Local Government Commission has asked us to treat them as two separate processes.
Thanks. Further question just around understanding the, I guess, the cost factor in terms of sort of how many households are in that community and how that would sort of sit at a household level if the cost were to be absorbed just in the Bunnythorpe area.
Through you, Mr Mayor, again, reference to my answer earlier to Councillor Butt. So the decision on how we fund a community board, if it were to happen, is a second step in the process. So that would happen after you took submissions and constituted the board. You would then decide how much, who would cover it. But to answer Councillor Barrett's question, from what we know at the moment, within the boundary of the proposal, there are 577 rating units. So it would be up to councillors to then consider whether those rating units would cover the costs of this board, part of the costs of this board, or whether it would come from across the city.
Thank you. If we were to consult, finally, in terms of questions, if we were to consult, would we be able to tease out sort of community preferences on that point, as well as the broader questions of the community board and the representation arrangement?
As I understand it, the consultation would be specifically on the proposal as it has been received, without reference to how we would pay for it. That would be a second step in the process. So we could potentially, when we got to that point, we could then consult separately on that.
Great. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Batty.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and thank you, Hannah. Hannah, could you just, if you can, clarify the process? So if we decided to go with the board, and my understanding is obviously that board would meet within Bunnythorpe, and then if there was issues or something they wanted, I don't know, I'll just say an example, they wanted some money for council. What is the process for that to, and the interaction that they will need to require with councillors?
Certainly. Through you, Mr Mayor. So the process would be that the community board would meet, the community board would have some delegated authority to make some decisions. Anything outside of that delegated authority would need to come up to council to ask for council's approval on something. So that would come up as a report to the council table, be discussed, debated upon here, and then decided by councillors. Having said that, there would also be councillors on that community board. So the information flow would be between the two groups.
Okay. And just to clarify the delegated authority, would there be any financial delegated authorities?
Possibly.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. So under option 2, the risks of the community board, one of the risks you've said is could set precedent for others to seek to establish a community and community board. Is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, if there are other communities within the city that feel that they would benefit from a community board, this one is established for Bunnythorpe, could that not necessarily be seen as an advantage to the rest of the community, that a precedent has been set and that other people could then apply? I mean, I'm just wondering why that's in the risk category.
The reason it's in the risk category is we currently don't have community boards, so it would be a new system, a new way of doing things for Palmerston North. It's not necessarily a bad thing that there are more community boards.
Okay. And then the other point you've raised as a risk is role of current grassroots community groups may be superseded by a more formal body. So are you meaning within Bunnythorpe, that community groups within Bunnythorpe that currently meet and discuss issues would have their role superseded by the board? Can you just explain what you mean by that?
Yes, in the report when I'm referring to community grassroots groups, I am referring to the groups inside Bunnythorpe at the moment. I've had conversations with several members of the community who are part of these groups. They are unsure as to what they would do if there was a community board. They've said to me that they don't know yet whether they would continue.
But, okay, that's fine, I'll just leave that issue there. So in terms of the process of establishing the community board, you're suggesting that 4 representatives from the Bunnythorpe community would be elected onto the board, and then 2 city councillors. Would they be appointed from councillors who are already elected, or would they be elected from within Bunnythorpe?
They would be appointed.
Appointed. And what advantage would the board have in advocating to council that isn't currently there for the current community association?
If your question is specifically about advocating, I don't believe there would be a benefit.
So what would be the benefit potentially for the community in having community board over what they have currently?
The benefits that have been raised by community members are particularly around accountability, so feeling that there would be a place where they could ask their questions and have those answers.
Okay. Because one of the concerns, or one of the issues that's raised in the report is that the community board might not be able to achieve what the community thinks it can achieve. So do we think that the community is quite clear on what a board can and can't do?
I attended the 2 meetings where the proposal was put to the members who were there. The information that was provided was around the process and the requirements of the Local Government Act and making sure that they understood the process before signing the document. But there was not any discussion as to what they thought would be achieved.
Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Hannah. Some time ago we had a community board in Ashurst. Do you know why that we stopped that community board, or why it was pulled back?
Through you, Mr Mayor. That was 1989. So I have asked and found out, but I wasn't there, so if I'm inaccurate, please forgive me. My understanding is that the Ashurst Community Board decided that they weren't able to fulfil what they were wanting to without being a part of the city, particularly that they had quite significant delegation over their infrastructure, and it wasn't an efficient way of providing that service.
Thank you.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just one clarification along the lines of Councillor Barrett when he was saying about the 70,000 being spread over 577 rating units. So if it was decided that the community was to cover the cost of it, that's around over $120 per annum per rating unit, is it? What is the option there?
That is one of the options, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Again, related to Councillor Vaughan's question, how sure we are that the people who have signed this document know that if council decides they have to pay the extra money on their rates, like, do we know that they already know that they might have an extra?
I can confirm what I have told the Bunnythorpe Community Committee, which was that the decision on how it would be funded would still have to be made, and that one of the options would be a targeted rate. But I only was able to present to that one group, so I cannot confirm that the rest of the community understands that, no.
Thank you.
Right, no further questions. Thank you, Hannah. Right, councillors, we have the resolution there, either 1, that the council reject the proposal, or 2, that we give effect to the proposal, but put it out to public notice and invite submissions on that. I'm going to move number 1, that the council reject the Greater Bunnythorpe proposal of the 13th of June 2021 and place public notice of this decision. I'll look to move it, seconded by Councillor Bowen. Councillors, I think clearly Bunnythorpe matters, and I think, but is this really the way forward? I think we've heard from questions that have been teased out, the report from the officer. Is this really the way Bunnythorpe will be better represented? No, I don't think it is. There are some big issues at the moment that may be clouding what is the real issue here. We know we have a lot of uncertainty around waters, rail hub, possible ring road, and clearly they affect not only all residents in the city, but Bunnythorpe. I understand the uncertainty that they bring as well, but there are processes to be able to deal with those particular issues in a separate manner. Leave it to the group that already exists. I've been to that group many times. It's a strong community group. It regularly meets and provides feedback to this council. We have several councillors that attend every meeting. We have several staff that attend every meeting. And they make various and well thought out submissions to us. And that community already gets a very strong input and advocacy with this council. We've got to work as one city. And since 1989, when amalgamations began, that has happened. So really, I don't want us to go looking backwards. This council is very much about trying to move forwards. We've done that as a city-wide representation system since 2013, and we've seen more unity and a better cohesive city in Palmerston North, including our towns. So I think there's a risk here of polarising different parts of our community by allowing a certain group to have their own community board. So, councillors, I ask you to support this. There are many ways we already support this great community, and it does matter, but this is not the way forward. Councillor Barn.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I absolutely agree with the comments that you've made. Of course, Bunnythorpe matters, and I will note the rather wonderful T-shirts. You can't see the rabbit, but they're great. Of course, Bunnythorpe matters, but so does Highbury and Takaro and Summerhill and Akotere and all of our constituent parts. And I think the strength of the way we operate at the moment is that, that equality of opportunity within to connect with elected members across the city. As the report notes, every constituent part of our city has equal access to elected members. My experience over particularly the last term of council, though, has been some sections of our community have worked that to their advantage, and Bunnythorpe will be one of those. They have significant connection with elected members and with officers through the very strong community group that exists. And so I feel very confident that even in these terms of rejecting the Bunnythorpe proposal, what we're accepting is that Bunnythorpe has its voice heard around this table already. And there's no need for an additional layer of bureaucracy to get better results for Bunnythorpe. I'm very confident that Bunnythorpe is getting very good results already and support rejecting this proposal, while at the same time we go out with our representation review, which offers an opportunity for people to come back to us on various elements about representation. Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I'm not going to be voting in support of this recommendation. I think I'll give notice that if this fails, I'll move number 2. I've thought long and hard about this, and I think ultimately it's not really about what we around this table think Bunnythorpe has or doesn't have in terms of representation. It's about what the community of Bunnythorpe thinks they have or they don't have in terms of representation. And the fact is that they have gone to the significant step of using a legal process, getting the right number of signatures and requesting a community board. And I actually don't think it's a problem if a community identifies strongly with itself and wants to have a community board. I think that's good democracy. If people want to have a board that represents them and their community, then we around the table should be looking to enable it, not look to keep all the power in here. And I feel that if it acts as a precedent, and Ashurst and Linton and whatever other place, ask for a community board. Well, where is the problem with that? Community boards exist all across the country. They're not necessarily divisive or polarising. They act as a sort of a funnel for community views. And I think just because we as councillors feel that Bunnythorpe has good representation and has a strong community association, that's not really what's at issue here. What's at issue is what the community is asking for. And I would see us more as enablers than people to just say no at this point. So I realise that might not be the majority view around the table, but I do think that if the community comes and asks for something, we should have an open mind and listen to it. So whatever we might personally think about how good a deal Bunnythorpe does or doesn't have, that doesn't really come into it. This is about responding to a community request. Thanks.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just want to speak in support of this recommendation, and for the following reasons. I do acknowledge the aspirations of the Bunnythorpe community, and Bunnythorpe does matter, and indeed it does matter. So, but I think in considering this this recommendation or the proposals before us, I think we need to take into consideration the advice that has been given and the benefits and the risks, and sort of balance it out and see what outweighs the other. And personally, based on the recommendations and the proposals and the advice that has been given to us, I'm compelled actually to vote in support of the recommendation before us. There are established community mechanisms for representation, and I think the paper before us actually highlights that there's no evidence to suggest that elected members cannot or do not represent rural issues. I think by us not accepting this proposal, we're actually setting a precedent for other communities to have community boards. And there's nothing wrong with having community boards, but it's all about the geographical location. Does it work for Palmerston North? Do we need another layer of bureaucracy or more staff, time and resources? And also, in terms of good governance, does having a community board actually enhance good governance? And in my opinion, within the Palmerston North context, my answer is no. So I'll be supporting this recommendation before us, because I do not think that elected members cannot and do not represent rural issues. There are mechanisms in place, and and there's no distinctive, sufficiently distinct or isolated issues to sort of warrant a community board representation, and therefore I'll be supporting this.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, first want to comment on process, actually. I think it's just quite disappointing to be locked into a process by legislation where we have to decide now whether we want to sustain or quash a petition from the community before we can actually hear from even the whole of the Bunnythorpe community, and certainly not the whole of the city's communities. And I find it most awkward for us to be left in this position by what I see as a shortfall of the statutory process. My view on the petition and our response is that we would be quite misguided at this point to quash it. And my reasons for that is primarily that the purpose of the Local Government Act speaks to enablement of communities making decisions on their own, I guess on their own intent, really, that communities should be able to make decisions for themselves, and that ultimately the representation arrangements need to emerge from the ground up and then be brought into act by the actual political arrangements for the community. We've got some long-standing issues in local government around trust, around engagement. If you actually read the surveys around how people feel about local government, it's not all good reading, unfortunately, and I see this as potentially a way to build greater engagement, greater trust, better pathways for accessibility for people in the community to have some input into the political process. you know, we tend to see and think of ourselves as quite approachable here at council, and I do think that we do an excellent job of trying to do that. I also reflect on the first time I came into this chamber, which was probably now well in excess of 15 years ago. I was terrified coming in to talk to council. This is actually quite a challenging environment, and I think actually providing something that has the accessibility and slightly less formality in terms of a community board could actually be a way to explore providing democracy in this community in the future. You know, quite a few of the metros around do actually have community boards. We sort of run with the metros when we want to. Well, this is part of the idea of a city growing up and maturing, is that quite often you do end up with a further element of the democratic process. And finally, you know, and I think we had a really good example from Ashurst where, you know, once a community board was then seen to have drawn to a natural conclusion, there is a way to conclude it. It could well be that the drive for this community board is, you know, largely around the heat in this moment, around, you know, the Kiwi Rail proposals, around some of the infrastructure and roading proposals that are coming through. Might be that in a number of years' time, there's a natural time to wind it up. But I think we've heard loud and clear from this community through the form of the petition. I would dearly love for us to be able to consult before having to decide whether to sustain or quash this. But I'm very much of the view that it should be sustained, that we should give the community their rights as provided under the Local Government Act, with us enabling community decision-making by the community. Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Happer.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm also going to vote against this recommendation, and I'm happy to second the motion that's been put forward by Councillor Johnson. I also think that we should be looking at this, and because the community has come to us and put up that they want us to look at the community board option, so I'm quite happy to look at that as an option going forward. And just looking at what Councillor Barrett put up and what Councillor Johnson put up, I've been swayed by their arguments, so I'm quite happy to go down that track and reject this option that's been put up here today. I do think that as a council we do need to listen to our communities, and that's why I'm actually voting the other way today. So thank you.
Councillor Denison.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I've listened to various views and are going to support this recommendation at this stage. I think Councillor Barrett makes a very fair point around the statutory process having a weakness and having to make the decision right now without wider views from the community. One is around a value proposition. I guess if the targeted rate was adopted, would the Ashurst community be satisfied with the value of $120 odd per annum towards a community board? That's one real possibility I think that they need to be presented with. In my past experience with a similar model with ward committees, where there's a few that are elected onto the board that think that they speak for the wider community, when actually I prefer wider forums when every member can come and say their voice and get a wider feel for what the thoughts are on specific issues. The subsequent debates that we'll have around elections, around ward and city-wide is one that will be of interest. And with ward options, there is options of ward committees. And I think that is another capture opportunity for the community of Bunnythorpe. But at this point, I am not convinced of the need. I do hear that it's self-led, but I think there's a number of weaknesses with the model of community boards. One is that they don't have any budget. So all it is again, of advocating for the council as a whole to deliver programs on behalf of the community. So if this is to fail, I think if we are wanting a community board, I think we need to consider giving them some budget, because otherwise, to self-empower them, if we want to enable, I think we need to self-empower them, and it needs to come with budget. So it's either an extreme on one end or not go at all. Thank you.
Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I absolutely agree that our city should have equal access to participation, and I acknowledge that community boards definitely have their place, particularly in local decision making where there may be a disconnect between our communities of interest and decision makers. I'm really uncomfortable though with the process that we're constricted by, which is obviously guided by legislation, in that we've had a community who, as Councillor Johnson's pointed out, have taken the initiative, they've organised and worked within the framework of legislation which allows them to come to this point. However, there seems to be a step missing of going back to engage and shaping a proposal to engage with the wider community on. I think we need to acknowledge that the signatories who agreed to this proposal had a common goal of seeking the community board to be established. However, there are other members of the Bunnythorpe community. We've heard particularly through submissions over the last 6 to 12 months around the growth in Bunnythorpe and maybe the misunderstanding of what the makeup of that community is. I know certainly the Bunnythorpe community have raised concerns around how we have represented the population, for example, that it actually may be bigger than understood. And through the report, I think it was highlighted that a community, the Bunnythorpe community, is made up of people who live in a particular boundary, but also people who are drawn to the Bunnythorpe community or have affiliations in other way. And I think we can recognise that that happens with communities across the city. My biggest concern at the moment is around the equal access to this opportunity, because I think that, and other councillors have raised this, we've got a number of communities across our city who could benefit from this opportunity as well. And so if we were to go out, if we were to make a decision that we saw a place or value in a community board model for this council, then where is the opportunity for us to go out to our communities of interest within our Palmerston North boundary as a whole, and not see a disconnect between one particular community having an advantage because they did take initiative in engaging with the Act, whereas other communities may not be aware that that opportunity exists. So I'm not going to support the proposal today. I'm going to support the recommendation on the screen. And I think that through the second process we have around representation, I think that is the vehicle for engaging with our community around how the decision making happens for the city and what representation looks like. I think that alongside this, there's been learnings that we can feed into the future of local government review, which is happening along the side, because there are steps missing from what the Act enables currently. It is flawed that a community can organise themselves, come here, and it is only a yes/no. That's a flawed process. If we accept the proposal, then we are saying, yes, there will be a community board, and if we go back out to the Bunnythorpe community, it's okay, now what does it look like? There is no conversation around opportunities and that kind of middle engagement. So I think there's a step missing, and so at this point I am going to support the recommendation on the screen.
Councillor Finlay.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just listening to the Deputy Mayor, I was actually going to vote against this, what's on the board at the moment, and go further with the Bunnythorpe people. But when we look at the representation of the whole city, wards will come up and other things like community boards. That is the time we should be looking at it across the city, not just for one individual community. And I would recommend to the Bunnythorpe community that they come to us then with submissions and asking for our support there for a community board. And we could look at the whole city, not just an individual part.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, I was also quite divided on this one. I can fully understand why Bunnythorpe has decided to go down this road, because it is quite traumatic, actually, to move from the Manawatu District Council into our boundary and sort of figure out where your place is. I can understand why there is some tension there. But at the same time, I agree with the Deputy Mayor in that this process that we are currently stuck in at the moment, I feel is not the right process. I don't see the evidence that shows that saying yes to establishing a community board in Bunnythorpe would increase their feeling of belonging with our wider community. I don't see, I don't see the evidence there, and I do feel that having the representation review, which is happening very, very shortly, actually gives the entire community, Bunnythorpe and outside of Bunnythorpe, the opportunity to actually have a say in how we can sort of connect Bunnythorpe a bit more and, start to look at some of the issues that we're facing there. So I feel like more conversation in that space would actually be a better move than just saying yes and going down this road and risking further separating Bunnythorpe out from the rest of the community. I feel that Bunnythorpe is part of Palmerston North, is part of our community, and they do get representation here as well. But I acknowledge how Bunnythorpe might not feel that way. So for me, it's about trying to figure out how we can get that relationships going. I'm going to use the term te o le wā, which is a Pacifica term about looking after those spaces and those relationships between us. I think that is where we need to be going, and the representation review might help with that, but this I don't think would. Apologies. I will support this, but the community board wouldn't do that.
All right, thank you, councillors. I think we might have exhausted that. Just look, write a reply. I'll keep it brief. Look, I just want to remind councillors, that I think Councillor Barrett made a very good point. The process is pretty broken if it's just a yes or a no. But there is a representation review, so there is a second round, definitely, if whichever way this sort of goes. I do want to remind councillors too that there already is a mechanism. Some have said there isn't. There is. It exists. And I do remind councillors if they want to go and participate in that community meetings, I think it's on every month. There's a few of us go. Look, the Bunnythorpe community are listened to, and the amount of investment that has been gone into that community and will continue to go into that community is significant. And I think some numbers were prepared by our staff, and it even shocked me in terms of the millions that are being spent in that particular community, and rightly so. So look, this is about the process really, what we're talking about. So I'd ask you if you could support the recommendation, please. We'll vote. And that is passed, 12 votes for and 3 against. Right, councillors, we'll move now to number 6, which is the Representation Review 2021, the initial proposal. We have a report on page 51 from our Governance Manager, Hannah, and I invite you up to speak to that.
Kia ora no. As you are aware, the representation review is required because of the introduction of Māori wards for the 2022 election, which as a consequence has also created general wards. The report before you sets out all the facets which must be considered when undertaking representation review. The report puts to you three options, particularly specific to the number of councillors. Those three options were derived from 25 practicable options through data analysis of communities of interest, which is in Appendix 1, a series of engagement hui, which are set out in Appendix 2 and 4, in-depth phone surveys, summary of which is in Appendix 5, and then analysed against the criteria that was earlier agreed by Council. The report recommends that no geographical wards be put in place, no further wards, and no community boards. As for the number of councillors, there are three options in the paper. Option A is to keep the same number of councillors to what we have now, but to have 2 Māori ward councillors and 13 general ward councillors to be elected citywide, which is the at-large system that we're used to at the moment. Option B is to reduce the number of councillors, and the report proposes 10 members, 1 member for the Māori ward and 9 members for the general ward, also to be elected citywide. Option C is a mixed system. The option there is for 12 members, 6 to be elected at large by all electors, and 6 to be elected through the Māori ward and the general ward, 5 for the general ward and 1 for the Māori ward, also to be elected citywide. The other part of the review is the naming of those wards. That's also part of the review, and that's set out for you in 5.7, section 5.7 of the report. The process from here is that we will place public notice of Council's decision today and seek submissions on that initial proposal. Then Council will hear from submitters who wish to be heard on the 21st of September and then take the information gleaned from those submissions and consider a final proposal in October. And I note, I'm sorry, I must have been a little bit dyslexic in the report. It says 9th of October, but it's actually the 6th of October on 7.2. Sorry, there was a typo there.
All right. Thank you, Hannah. I'll open up for questions. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. And firstly, thank you for a very well-researched and thorough report. Just a couple of questions. Firstly, obviously, iwi has been consulted in terms of the naming. Have iwi been consulted about whether they have a preference on the options at this stage, or would that happen through the consultation process?
No, yes, they have. It's noted in the report. Rangitane would prefer option A, which gives 2 Māori ward councillors.
And was the reasoning for that simply around having 2 seats, or did they indicate a preference of the number of councillors aside from that issue?
The preference was for the larger number of seats, the aspiration being that they would like to see Māori community voice and values reflected at this table.
Okay, thank you. And the second question is around perhaps if we were to go with 12 councillors, outlined on page 59, the calculation that's set there and the percentage currently on the Māori electoral roll being 10.7% as compared to the total Māori population of 18.9%. When do Māori have the next opportunity for them to make a decision about whether they enrol in the Māori electoral roll? When is that? Is that 2024?
At the moment, it's 2024, the next Māori option. However, that is currently under review by the government, and there are submissions out on that right now, so it could change.
Okay, sorry, just to carry on, and just to try and get an understanding of if that percentage were to change, so we don't know when that might happen. That's obviously based on that review. So in terms of us making a decision now that's based on the current percentage, when would be the next potential opportunity that we would have to make a decision on the representation review? Would that be, could we choose to in 3 years if the Māori electoral roll population, changed or the population changed?
Yes, you can have a representation review every 3 years. You don't need to wait the 6.
Okay, and thank you for the correspondence and the questions that you've already asked, but just to clarify, if we had 12 councillors, your advice was that the Māori electoral roll would need to be at least 13% in order to get the 2 Māori seats, is that correct?
Sorry, could I just clarify which option are we talking, which, a mixed system or at large?
At large. I realise that's not an option, but if there was an option, if option B was amended to 12 councillors, for example, in the future, in 3 years' time, because obviously there's a big gap between the current 10.7% and our total Māori population at the moment. And sorry, just to give context, I realise that at the moment the only driver for that 10% has been around how that impacts on general elections, not local body elections. So I assume that the decision that we make today may have an influencing factor. I mean, perhaps I'll put that as a question. Would the structure that we decide today have an influence potentially on whether Māori saw it as appealing to be on the Māori electoral roll?
I don't know.
How would we find out that advice? Or do we just make our own assumptions?
I think the only assumptions we can make is the behaviour of people on the people choosing to be on the Māori electoral roll for the general elections. Not all Māori choose to be on the Māori electoral roll, even though there is the option to do so, and even though they know that there will be seats in Parliament. I think that's all we can derive at this stage.
Okay, I'll leave it there for now. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks, Anna, for such a comprehensive report. On page 53, which is, I'm looking at option 1, and looking at the risks section, you said that the same number of members may not be changing, may not meet changing needs of the community. What did you mean by that? I'm not really understanding it.
Sorry, I'm just trying to find the
page
passage.
53, sorry, on the risks, in the risks section. Option A, sorry.
I'm just thinking what I meant by that also. Sorry. Just give me a moment. I also am unsure, so I'd like to apologise for the ambiguity of the statement. Certainly that chart is a summary of the rest of the text in the report. All I can say at this stage is that the reason that you are required to have a representation review as a result of introducing Māori wards. Introducing Māori wards is the first time we've done this, so it's created an opportunity for change. You have an opportunity now that you wouldn't necessarily otherwise have had to consider 3 years earlier than you otherwise would have how your population has changed.
And one more question, Mr. Chair. And also on page 64, you've made a case for diverse candidates for keeping option A. Let's say if we go for option A, 13 councillors plus 2 Māori wards, coming to 15. You mentioned that there was a repeated belief at many community meetings that the more positions that were let's say, available on the council. The more seats available on the council will create diversity. And then you rebutted it by saying that the research actually suggests that, having a voting system actually makes a difference. Do you stand by that statement?
Yes, the research does say that.
Can I also ask what research was that?
So the electoral system has a far greater influence on proportionality, what reflects the population in elections, than anything else. So people might look around this table and say, oh, we've got great diversity, we've got lots of different faces, we've got lots of different ages. We do. But that's not a consequence of having X number of members at the table.
Thanks, Mr. Chair.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. I've got some questions about some of the statements in the report and what evidence you have to back them up. So on page 63, you've got a statement about the quality of candidates. So you've said, I presume this is just an opinion, having a large number of councillors may limit the quality of candidates. Do you have any research or evidence to back up that statement?
The statement itself is just an introduction to the paragraph which follows it.
So further, the paragraph that follows it suggests some reasons why the quality of candidates may not be good if the remuneration is low. But do you have any evidence to support that?
The statement may holds, so it also may not.
So there's no evidence to support that as far as you're aware, it's just an opinion?
The statement may holds, but the same could be true, it also may not. It doesn't say it will be the case.
So let's move on to then the statements that you've made around diverse candidates. So you've said large numbers of councillors may both enable and at the same time create obstacles to diversity at the council table. Can you give me some evidence of that?
Sorry, can you just tell me what page you're on, Councillor?
Page 63D, diverse candidates, your opening statement.
Again, simply just a summary statement of the paragraphs that follow. So some of the paragraphs suggest that diversity may be aided by having more, and some of the paragraphs suggest that diversity may be restricted by having more.
So is there any evidence to show that having a large number of councillors reduces diversity or obstructs diversity?
So the large number of there are several arguments in each of these criteria that suggest that it's possible that where remuneration is low, some people may find obstacles to standing as a candidate. So by having more councillors, the remuneration pool must be divvied up amongst those councillors, which leads to lower remuneration.
So is there some evidence of that, or is that just an opinion? This is what I'm trying to establish so that I can understand how much weight to put on what's written in the report.
I have not got data of Palmerston North's experience on this, no.
Okay, thank you. So let's have a look at public confidence on page 68. So you've made a statement under G there to say that public confidence in council may be encouraged by elected members having the time in a full-time role to connect with residents and get the word out about how the decisions of council affect people's everyday lives. I didn't see any comments to that effect in the in-depth interviews or the report that was produced. So where did that statement come from?
That statement has come from conversations around the table, in particular around workload pressures on councillors at the moment.
So that's your professional opinion then, is it, rather than a coming out of the survey?
It is.
Okay. All right. Let's move on then to cohesiveness on page 66. At the top of page 66, so you've talked about councils around the country who've struggled to keep cohesion around their council table, in recent times? Did those councillors have more did those councils have more councillors around the table than Palmerston North, or fewer?
As you'll be aware, Councillor, the only council that has more than Palmerston North is Christchurch, and Christchurch was not being referred to.
So how can you make that statement then, that cohesiveness reduces with an increasing number of councillors, because the evidence shows the opposite?
I haven't made a linking statement there. I've said in general groups, whether they're councils or not councils, are harder to keep together the more people you have.
Okay, I'll leave it there. Thanks, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor, and thanks, Hannah. Hey, I just really want to just make sure that we've got some clarity just around that diversity question. My reading of the report and all of the supporting material suggests that it's a combination of STV, which is the voting platform that we use, and the number of members, which probably increases the chances of diversity.
I would suggest that it's the combination of STV and at-large, which has created the proportional representation that we see around the table in Palmerston North, that by having an at-large system, special interest groups can combine behind a candidate and get their interests represented at the table, which allows for the diversity.
Great, thanks for the clarification. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
All right, councillors, that's exhausted the questions. Thank you, Hannah. It is a very thorough report, and yeah, appreciate the work that staff and also the many meetings. I note the pre-meetings that went through to try and get a wider community of interest view. So, councillors, we have. I'll just go back to where we're meant to be. Just one moment. Is it? Yeah. Page 51, which that council adopts one option, option A, option B or option C, as its initial proposal. So we have three options there. I'm going to throw it open, Deputy Mayor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. So I would like to move option B with the change that there would be 12 elected members, 11 general ward, 1 Māori ward. Yes, I would like to move that.
Okay. Seconded by Councillor Finlay. All right. So that is around option B with the changes in A, having 12 councillors to be elected under the ward system, specifically a general ward councillor, 11 general ward councillors and 1 Māori ward councillor. All right. Deputy Mayor, if you'd like to speak to that.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Just briefly, I think we've seen the at-large system, as Hannah outlined, the at-large system and the combination of STV work particularly well for us in Palmerston North. So I do think that I would like that to see that system continue, recognising that it says the general ward because we are introducing a Māori ward, and so what we have called at-large previously will now become the general ward. The divide between having half, as presented in other options, half at-large and half on wards, I think would create quite a level of confusion. And what I've seen work particularly well is special interest groups being able to support or provide support to particular groups of elected members that represent their interests. So I do think that the general ward or the at-large approach does work well. I also am interested in hearing our community's views on promoting the 12 councillors as a number. I think there's been recognition quite significantly at various levels that we are one of the larger councils and that there may be concern over that. And I also think that we need to recognise that the role of a councillor has developed quite significantly over the years. And I know certainly from my own personal experience, the workload, the engagement, the role of an elected member for me now is significantly different from 8 years ago when I was first elected. It's increased quite a bit. I remember when I first got elected that I had a full-time job that I comfortably managed with some flexibility. I was fortunate to be in a flexible role with the role of an elected member, and I just can't see that happening now. The demands on elected members are much higher than they used to be, and I think that there is value in recognising that we have a limited remuneration pool and that there is only one way for us to increase that, and so elected members can comfortably view this as a full-time role, many of which do it as a full-time role at the moment. So I actually do see that as an advantage. I think that the people around the table are very effective in their roles, and that there's no reason why reducing that slightly is going to limit the effectiveness. If anything, the balance of providing an increased remuneration with access to that pool may mean that there are less pressures on elected members to have an income on the side as well. So I think that there's many benefits to this, and I'm really keen for us to have a proper conversation. This has been attempted, acknowledge the work that Councillor Bowen did in the past couple of years to try and bring this up and have a serious conversation about reducing the numbers. I think actually it is time to revisit that, and I think that what's in front of us is the most appropriate way forward.
Councillor Finlay.
Well, I totally agree with what the Deputy Mayor has said, but for years I've always thought that we have too many councillors around the table. The community have been saying for years that we have too many councillors around the table. Local government New Zealand has been telling us we have too many councillors around the table. So I've heard so many people telling us over the years that we have so many councillors around the table, maybe it's time to cut them back a little bit.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Thank you to the Deputy Mayor bringing this forward. I will be supporting it. In past reviews, we had a proposal which went for 12, and there was a poll that was initiated, and it was a tight race, acknowledge that, but it did come out slightly in favour of reduced councillors. Unfortunately, it went to the commissioners and they decided that 15 was about right, which was a complete ridiculous outcome of spending so much engagement for that outcome. That was disappointing at the time for many. But to bring this point back before us now, I think that is timely. I think the community will want to say. This will generate the engagement, and I'm very much in favour for it, for many of the reasons that the Deputy Mayor outlined. I too have worked in full-time roles alongside being a member in the past, but I would say that is quite limiting now to have a full-time occupation or career with council commitments. And so therefore, you need to compromise your other professional roles into more a part-time or contracting basis. So it does have a limitation on who that would appeal to. And so therefore, one mechanism is to remunerate the role to give that opportunity for more to consider it and not have that limitation on, because there will be adjustments in their professional direction. And with a 3-year term, nothing's guaranteed thereafter, so therefore I think it's fair that there's a balance and this will create it. Thank you, Mr Mayor.
Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'll also be supporting this recommendation. I've certainly been on a long process in my thinking and considering the options, and I certainly started by favouring option C, purely from the reason that, you know, the current framework that we have
one of the frustrations I've had with it is, particularly with the introduction of Māori wards, is the limitation that those on the Māori electoral roll won't have the opportunity to vote for the at-large councillors. And I do think that's a limitation, and I think the mixed model was one that I seriously considered as being able to partially rectify that, that limitation. But I agree with what other councillors have said, and I came to the same conclusion myself, that actually creating a really confusing system was not going to be helpful for us getting our voter turnout up and encouraging engagement with the democratic, the process of getting people to vote. I also then favoured option 1 for the reason of that it provided the opportunity to have 2 Māori ward councillors sitting at the table. And it did frustrate me. I did quite a bit of maths around it, recognising that we're really on the threshold of we can't have 1.5 Māori ward councillors at the table, so it either tips over the 1.5 to 2 or under the 1.5 to 1. And that threshold is quite, obviously it's influenced very much at the moment by the number of people we have at this table, but it's also very much influenced by the percentage of our community who decide to enrol on the Māori electoral roll. And doing the numbers, if that was of interest to Māori in our community to have more Māori ward seats at this table, it would be not too difficult, I don't think, to rally up more Māori to be enrolled. And I think that a percentage at the moment sits at around, if we had 12 councillors, it sits at around 13%. Would need to be enrolled on the Māori roll. So whilst 1 seat at the table is not ideal, I think 2 would be better. I guess fundamentally it came back to what do I think is the right number of councillors to sit around the table, and I do agree that 15 is too many for a number of reasons. When Councillor Bowen raised that last year, it was certainly, I was on the fence with that, and there were some strong reasons why I was considering supporting 12 at that point, but because it did trigger a representation review, which didn't seem the right time to be having that at that time, and also the strong arguments around the belief that there would be an increase in diversity if we had 15, that sort of tipped me towards not supporting that at the time. But ultimately, best practice does say that a better functioning council or board happens with slightly less numbers than this. And I'm more comfortable for us to reduce it down to 12 councillors. So anyway, that's a bit of a long story to how I landed to be supporting this in front of me. I guess what I see is that this would set us down a path that would improve somewhat the representation of Māori at the table now, and that could potentially be strengthened in the future, as well as balancing that with trying to get the right number of actual seats around the table. So I'm really happy. I think this is the right balance, and I'll be happy to support it.
Councillor Johnson.
I won't be supporting a reduction in the number of councillors, and I'll explain why. The most pressing argument for us retaining the same number of councillors to me is the fact that the same number of councillors would enable 2 Māori ward councillors. And I'm very surprised to see the Deputy Mayor proposing something that is in direct contradiction to what Rangatahi have advised they would like. If we have voted to create a Māori ward, as we have, it seems extremely... it seems a strange decision to make, to then reduce the number of councillors so that instead of 2 Māori ward councillors, we would then only have 1, effectively cutting in half the influence of the Māori ward that we have voted to bring in not so long ago. So I think in terms of the message that it's sending to the Māori community, that's the wrong message to be sending at this point in time. I think it's very important for the Māori ward councillors themselves that we don't just have one person who's isolated, the only Māori ward representative around the table. It's much better to have 2 people, and it gives voters on the Māori roll a diversity of candidates, rather than just having one person to represent them. So I think that's a very strong reason not to support this, but to support the 13+2. The other thing is that when I looked at the research that had been done most recently in the appendices to the report, 2/3 of the public who gave an opinion suggested that we retain the same number of councillors or more. And it seems to me that in the face of that, reducing the number of councillors is not in accordance with what the public has suggested they are happy with. And let's be clear, the cost to the public remains the same, whether we have 10 councillors or 15. The cost is the same. The only thing that changes is the salary that the councillors receive. And I am left wondering whether this isn't some kind of a bid to increase our salaries, quite honestly. So I'm just going to speak to that, because the salaries that we receive as councillors are certainly less than many of us could receive if we were working in the private sector. But that's because there's an element of public service when you stand for council. It's not a career path. It's not. I just think it's the wrong way to be going to create full-time councillors on some kind of career path. We are temporary representatives of the people. We're here for a small number of terms, usually. It's not meant to be a salary that is some kind of career-type salary. It's meant to be a salary that enables you to get by. It is actually around about the median wage in New Zealand. So I don't think that reducing the number of councillors so that we can increase salaries is a proper and appropriate reason for reducing the number of councillors. And nobody so far has been able to give me a good reason why 15 councillors is a bad number. Just because the Remuneration Authority has got a feeling that there's too many councillors, so what? We're a cohesive council. We get stuff done. We're more cohesive than many councils that have got a lot fewer number of councillors. We've got great diversity at the table. Yes, in part that's due to STV and at large, but also, if you only have a small number of councillors, naturally enough, the range of views around the table will be less diverse. I mean, that's just simply a factor of the maths. There were a lot of statements in the report, but it was a little short on evidence for my liking. And I really think that if we're going to be authentic and genuine in our interactions with the community and with Rangatahi, then we need to keep the same number of councillors and not be reducing it. Workload is a factor. Workload's already a factor. I don't think that having fewer people around the table to do the same amount of work is actually going to be helpful. It isn't. And so increasing the salary slightly and also increasing the workload, I just don't think that people are going to get better representation as a result. So I'd urge you not to support this, and if it fails, I will move the 13+2. Thank you.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. And I think my views on this subject are pretty well known from previous debates. I do support us looking at a smaller number of councillors and support us going out to our community to seek their views on that. And 12 has long been a number that I've been quite comfortable with. However, bringing Māori wards into the mix has complicated that for me. And I refer to the officer's report at 5.3a, where we talk about equality of vote. And there is, for me, a significant issue with us landing on a number of 12, because that means that the Māori ward representative would represent 27% more of the community than the 11 general ward councillors. So for me, the balance isn't right there between 11 plus 1 versus 13 plus 2. There is an issue there. However, I am going to support this recommendation I think it indicates a direction of travel that I'm very comfortable with, and I would like to seek our community's feedback on that as to whether they feel that this general reduction of numbers is right, but also specifically that issue of balance between our Māori ward councillor and our general ward councillors is right here at 11-1. Maybe 10-1 would be a fairer balance, or 9-1 to have a total of 10 councillors. But I'm open to that conversation in the community, so I will be supporting this. Thank you.
Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm quite torn with this particular recommendation because, I mean, I do support, having a Māori ward and an at-large system because I believe that effective representation is best achieved by an at-large system. But actually, there was an option that was not probably highlighted in the report that I actually preferred because I'm actually comfortable with having 12 councillors plus 1. I think that was my preferred option, having 13, so 12 plus 1. If this was to fail, actually I'll be moving 12 plus 1, but just want to echo also Councillor Johnson's comments around remuneration. And I think personally, if that's our motivation, then we shouldn't be in this place. This is a public office, and we ought to serve the community. We're not here to carve a career path out of this. We're here to serve a community. And I understand that, in having increased remuneration, this will allow people with lucrative careers to sort of give up their jobs and bring the skills to serve the community. But that should not be the motivation. That being said, I'm happy to move this recommendation, but if it's to fail, I would love to move the 12 plus 1. Thank you.
Councillors, I will support this. Sorry? Yeah, so am I. Yeah. I can see your name here. Yeah, thank you. Councillors, look, every city or TA is different, and I will support this. I think it does reflect our demographics well. There's a couple of red herrings that have been debated, one around remuneration, and I think everybody, I look around the table and I think everybody is doing this for the right reasons of public service. You can definitely go and get a job that is way, way more well paid than this, and without the amount of grief that you sometimes get as well. So I don't think we should be using that as some sort of tool to push this forward. And also the Māori, I absolutely understand councillors' concerns about Māori representation, but under this is a massive step forward for us as a council. They are represented, and as Councillor Naylor said, there is a mechanism there around the electoral roll to ensure that they get greater representation. They're not alone here. We have 4 appointed members on our standing committees. I would talk to Rangatane as you do almost every week, sometimes several times a day. So there is clear communication, and their voices are absolutely heard. And this will be better than what is here now. So I would like you to support it if you could. I do think we are, if you look at the league table on page 91, although I said every council is different, we are out of kilter with the rest of our country. And Councillor Finlay alluded to not only the community at large telling us that, but also other entities. So there's no right or wrong here, but as the Deputy Mayor has stated, times have changed, and this council needs to change with that as well. So if you could please support it. Councillor Dingwell, you are next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I stand. So, I am not going to support this one, and I was quite fiery the last time we had this discussion, but when we look at this report here, I'll just make some comments on that. When you're looking at capacity and accountability and participation and workload, actually, I think we're doing okay. I was elected onto this council in 2019 with 2 other councillors, and those 2 other councillors ended up with 5 roles, around about 5 extra roles, and I ended up with none. So when you're looking at sharing workloads, I do believe that actually, if people are struggling with their workloads, they can stop putting their hands up for quite so much and share the load between the 15 of us that are here. So in terms of workload, I don't buy that as an appropriate argument for this one. In terms of participation and for some people feeling like it's a bit intimidating to come into this table, I feel the opposite, actually. I think it's easier for people to come into this table if they've been able to have a conversation with one of us, if they have already built that relationship with a couple of us. And that's easier to do if there's more of us around this table. When you're looking at quality of candidates, I don't even know what that means. We are all quality candidates, actually. We all represent some kind of view, you know? We all represent some kind of community. So that whole statement, I do not even understand. When it comes to diversity, yes, we have a lot better diversity around this table, and getting Maori wards will increase our diversity, and that is going to be fantastic. But there are still aspects of our community that are missing from this table. We still don't have anyone in their 20s. We still don't have anyone with any kind of a disability. We still don't have anyone who's outwardly part of the rainbow community. So there are still, gaps in the diversity here, and I don't see how reducing the number of councillors will increase that. In terms of cohesiveness, I don't see any correlation between the bigger council and lack of cohesiveness. I think we all get along pretty fine here, actually, most of the time. So what does that bring us to? That brings us to income. Ha-ha, my favourite topic. When we're looking at income, actually, what we earn is more than what some people earn on the minimum wage in our city right now, working 40 hours a week, you know? And so this here is supposedly a part-time job, and we all know that it's the kind of job that expands to fill the space, but actually, in terms of our income, it is what it is, and until our lowest paid members of our community are, earning a bit more as well, we can't try and get more income for us. I think that's wrong. Money is not the reason why we're here. We're here to make decisions to improve the lives of our community. So then, that brings me to the fact that our city is still growing. And we've had this many councillors for how long now? And we are still growing. We are still representing more people. Reducing the number of people in this council is not going to help with that. And then finally, Rangatane wants us to have 15 councillors. That is the biggest reason, actually, out of all of the reasons that we should go forward and do this. We decided to do Maori wards because we need to have Māori voices at this table. And having standing committees is not enough, because the standing committees is mana whenua, and the Rangatane wards, the Maori wards, is for other people who identify as Māori who are not Rangatane. And I'm not going to be happy until half of this council is actually Māori. So those are my thoughts.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yesterday I was thinking about 12 councillors was about right, and then last night I couldn't sleep because I had to think about it. And over the time I've been here, which has been a while now, I was worked it out that every time we've had an election, we've lost 4 councillors every time. So that's 25%. And each time I've come in, it has taken Some councillors adapt very quickly depending on their background, some don't. So it takes a while for those councillors to be able to get their feet under the table. Even though I came from a corporate background, I found the processes through the annual plan, all the thing, by the time I really felt I was effective was probably after the 10-year plan had gone and into my second term. And then when you get into your second term, you've got another 4 new councillors come on board. So I think you've got, so for me, I'd like to stay with the status quo, because I think if you bring it down to 12, I think you can get a group of people that can swing this council too much one way. I look at all the other councils around the place, like Wellington, and you can compare us, but some of these are very dysfunctional councils. And we're not, because we've got a lot of people. You haven't got just 12 people, and in this scenario, we'll end up with 12 with 2 Maori candidate, councillor. So I think we will, by making it smaller, you can end up swinging it too much. I mean, we've all got political alliances around this table, and it works because, you know, we've got a couple of green, we've got a couple of red, we've got a couple of blue, black, and that's New Zealand first. Black and grey. No, I still see they're still there. They're coming up in the polls. But but you look at all the party affiliations and things around the table, whether they're there or not. You know, there's 4 or 5 parties. That's 10. You start reducing, and then you go, you know, you get an extra green, an extra red, and then you've got party affiliation. Yeah. It doesn't matter. I mean, we all get on around this table. We all have our arguments, but basically we all get on. And I was just running this through my head last night, and I thought, you know, we do have diversity around the table. The other thing too, I was thinking of the next elections, and as most of you know, I'm not standing next time, so it doesn't worry me. I don't care whether there's 12 or 15 around the table, but it does because I'll be a citizen of Palmerston North, and I'm thinking, well, hang on a minute, around this table, if we cut this back, that's 3 councillors that won't be around this table. And then you start looking, last time we got about 20 or 30 people wanting to stand. So you get a lot of quality. If you've just only got 12, those same people become more prominent, and then you can't get them off. And I've been there back when my father stood, you know, when my father was standing for council years back, and I watched it in at-large system where you had first past the post, and you never changed it because of them. I mean, part of it was at the first past the post system. But I just think we are a good council. We're not broken. I don't think the money's an issue, because even if you reduce it down to 12, you're still only looking at an extra 8 or 9 grand each. And I mean, for coming into this, I think the money's totally irrelevant. It's having that community spirit and what you want to help the city. And I think everyone around this council table, and I know I'm blurting on, but I think it's really important. I'd like to see the 15 stay, and I think we'll get more diversity. I didn't vote for Maori wards, but I mean, we're setting them up to fail if we only have 1 round the table. I think you need the 2, because it's a totally different environment where the people will be coming in. So I will not be supporting this.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'm not sure where to start, but sometimes when I vote for something which is against the officer's advice, my fellow councillors, senior fellow councillors, say something which feel me like I have committed a crime. Sometimes I feel, oh, I should have listened to the officer's advice. If you see all the options, the community views, general preference for 15 councillors at pre-engagement meetings and amongst those surveyed, and also the Rangitangi. I'm a bit confused. I'm not sure about the seconder, but I clearly remember that the proposer, Deputy Mayor, she supported 15 councillors when we had this discussion a few months ago. Number two, she was the strongest advocate for the Maori representation on this table. Why she is opting for one less councillor by proposing this thing? And a lot has been already said. If I say how many of us are doing it for money and raise your hands, I will not see any hands. So why the argument started from the Deputy Mayor that reducing the number of councillors will increase the remuneration. So I can't understand this. And on one hand, the proposer says the workload on each and every councillor is increasing. On the other hand, she's proposing reduce the number of councillors. Do you want to increase the workload to the councillors, more workload? And also, everybody is worried about getting Maori representation, and they say if we, and firstly, can I ask, is there any research that 12 is the ideal number? This is the number which will do magic? Number two, on page 59, if I understand it correctly, it says if we have between 6 to 14 councillors, then we'll have one Maori member. Why not 6 if we are going after 12? If the reduced number of councillors make it easy, why don't you go for 6 councillors? Why 12? Is there an argument behind 12? So I'm not going to support this. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Look, I'm not going to support this either. And the primary reason for that has been pointed out by both Councillor Johnson and also Councillor Dingwall, and that is the advice from iwi was for 15 councillors, and that would include 2 Māori ward members. One Māori ward member does not make a caucus. So you would start to talk about the isolation of that and marginalisation of that member right from the outset. We've also heard that, and it's our experience, that STV plus at large, plus the number of councillors, provides for greater diversity. And that's our experience, and we should value that. Reduced numbers on council, we've heard about workloads. Reduced capacity, our capacity to provide support to portfolios and various parts of our wider community. Reduced access to councillors. We've heard about that. We've had that discussion this morning with the Bunnythorpe conversation as well. So we really need to be thinking about if we reduce the number of councillors, reduce the number of Māori candidates or councillors on the council, then of course that equals reduced accessibility by the public. It's much easier for us to start from where we are at the moment in terms of our consultation, because the consultation might in fact actually tell us that we do have to reduce down, introduce wards, introduce community boards and those kind of things. Starting low means that it's very difficult for the public to see what big might look or what larger might look like. So please don't support this. It's a fool's errand. Thank you.
Councillor Harper.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. I'm also not going to be supporting this. I'd happy to second the motion that Councillor Johnson put up for option A. I think going for 15 councillors with 2 Maori wards is the option to go for. I do think having two Maori ward councillors represented around our table is the way to go. I do think supporting what Rangitangi want is the way to go as well. I think listening to what our iwi have wanted is what we should be listening to. I'm not sure where other councillors have got their alliances with, but I do think that we should be listening to what our iwi have asked us to listen to.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Colleagues, look, I find it quite disturbing, actually, the proposal that sits in front of us now. I think it would, if successful, create quite a deep stain, actually, on the history of this city. We're 150 years into the experiment of how we actually best represent this community. And finally, after 150 years, we were able to come to the point to establish a Maori ward. And to choose at that same moment in history to downsize, to cut in a way that is quite inequitable to Maori, I would find very repulsive. It's actually an injustice to put on to Maori to take a decision now that would cut the number of councillors by about 20%, and that would cut the Maori representation by 50% from day one, and to cut it from 2 to 1. There is a wide range of political views within Maoridom. We would be far better to have 2 seats here to bring some of that diversity of view to us. This looks to me like more power in fewer hands, more money in fewer pockets, and I'm not happy.
Okay, right, a reply back to the Deputy Mayor.
I think, as it was discussed through the previous decision we just made with the Bunnythorpe representation opportunity, we're constrained with our options from what legislation guides us. Legislation is what determines the framework for percentages of Māori ward councillors versus general ward councillors. And so just to be really clear, and I feel like I have consistently been really clear, my ideal makeup for representation in the city is co-governance. That is a 50-50 split between tangata whenua and current legislation doesn't allow for that. That is what I would like to see. That is not an option for us at the moment. It is also not an option for us to separate the total number of elected members from the Māori ward positions. And so whilst the total number of elected members is what's driving the recommendation being at 12, and I still stand by that, it is a flawed piece of legislation that doesn't allow us to fairly represent the number of Māori ward seats for both what tangata whenua are requesting, mana whenua are requesting, and what should be available honouring Te Tiriti o Waitangi, and that's co-governance. So I think that we don't have, we've got setbacks from the beginning. I still think that 12 is the most appropriate number for us to move forward with. We've heard that feedback from the Remuneration Authority for years and years and years, and I think that is something that we do need to review, the number of councillors. In regards to the remuneration comments, you're in a very privileged position if you can say that remuneration is not an issue. It is not something that we should be talking about. It is something we should be talking about. At the last election, prior to the last election, I met with a number of people who were considering standing for council. And one of those was a single mum who had 2 preschool kids, who I had met through my kids being born, and she could not afford to pay her mortgage and pay for childcare and be left with enough at the end of the week if she was on an elected member base salary. Now, we have increased the base salary since the last term, I'll acknowledge that, but it is not affordable for everybody to participate in elections and stand for local government. There is a young elected member, well, she's just moved out of the young elected member age category, down south who it cost her to be on council in her first term. When she did her tax return, she was literally $28 out, and it might seem like a small amount, but that was her main income outside of a part-time job on the side. It's a very privileged position to say that you're not driven by money, and we might not be right now, but is this a fair and equal opportunity for all members of our community to put their hand up and stand for local government? It needs to be a consideration. And the only way that we can influence remuneration is by addressing the number of elected members. So a number of you have called me out on my decision to push this, and I stand by that. We are in a privileged position to be able to stand for local government and say that money's not driving it or money's not a factor. That's not the case for everybody. So actually, I do think it needs to be a consideration. Again, through the Future of Local Government review, I hope that we can review the legislation that guides the percentage makeup of those who have decided to have a Māori ward. There is not an opportunity for co-governance, which does not honour Te Tiriti of Waitangi in this country, and that is something that needs to be changed as well.
All right, councillors. We will vote. And that is lost, 6 votes for and 9 against. All right. Councillor, I've got you noted with your amendment or recommendation, sorry. But what we will do, councillors, we'll break for a year, because I can see that will go on for a little while possibly as well. So look, we'll break and we'll be back at past. Thank you.
15:15.
Having holiday.
11. G'day, Billy. Where's the medal? We can't hear you. We're just having a break, Billy. We'll be back in about 15 minutes.
Susan, when you were saying, oh, we might get another Labour candidate and another Green candidate, I go, and that Winston's coming up with the polls, Lou, you'll be right.
Well, I had to do it. I had to. I haven't paid myself. I know you haven't, but I just wanted to keep it.
I should ask for contribution.
Thank you.
Good. I knew you would.
Rachel used to be a conservative.
Although someone would say to me the other week...
Billy, can you hear us?
Billy?
Can you hear us, Billy? Okay. All right. We can't hear you, unfortunately.
Or fortunately, depending on your viewpoint.
All right. We'll see if we can get that sound sorted with you.
Change your background, man.
All right. Kia ora, everybody.
Change your background.
We're back into the next round of council. And we are now still with our representation review, and we have an alternative recommendation that's come from Councillor Johnson, seconded by Councillor Harpiter, that council adopts option A. Councillor, would you like to speak to that?
Thanks, Mr Mayor. So, I mean, we did have very good debate previously, but I just want to reiterate a few really important points. The first one is around the Maori ward and Maori representation. It's absolutely inappropriate that the first time we vote for a Maori ward is the time when we would have chosen to reduce the number of Maori seats that could be represented in that ward. And that's why I think it's really important, having voted for Maori wards in good faith, that we maintain the number of councillors so that we have 2 Maori ward representatives. And as others pointed out earlier, these are representatives elected by people on the Maori electoral roll. They are different to the Mana Whenua reps that are appointed to council committees. And they're different in a couple of ways. First of all, they are representative of people voting on the Maori roll. But secondly, they will have a vote at the council table, at this table here. Currently, the committee reps don't have a vote at this table. They have a voice and a vote at committee level, but once it comes up to the council table, they're not here. So it's very important that we maximise the opportunity for Maori representation at the moment, under the current system that we have. And the way to do that is to adopt the 13+2 proposal. So if for no other reason, I urge you to support that. But there are other reasons, and councillors have talked well about the other reasons for staying with the 13+2. One is public opinion. 2/3 of people that were asked their opinion in the pre-engagement work that governance did wanted to keep the number of councillors the same. They did not want to reduce the number of councillors because people understand that reducing the number of councillors doesn't reduce their rates bill, it just reduces their opportunity to be represented. Workload is an issue. Workload is an issue with 15 of us. I can't see that that's going to improve by reducing numbers. In terms of cohesiveness, I think Councillor Beattie raised some excellent points, that actually having a large number of people around the table does increase the cohesiveness of the council because it's very difficult for one faction to kind of take over and rule. We all have to learn to work with one another. Sometimes I vote with my colleague here, sometimes I don't. We all have times where we vote with some people and not with others, and that's as it should be. The whole idea of having a debate is that lots of different views are represented and that we consider those views and we form an opinion at the time, not that we come to the debate with a pre-formed opinion. And the more people we have and the more diversity of views that are offered, and particularly if some of those worldviews are te ao Māori, then the better the decision-making is for the whole community. So I feel that it's very important at the moment that we act in good faith. We've voted in a Māori ward. We should not, at this moment, be voting to reduce the number of Māori ward councillors. And that's why the 13 plus 2 is the only option that we can vote for with integrity. Thank you.
Right, Councillor Naylor.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I won't be supporting this. I will be, if this fails, I will be supporting Councillor Michelad's proposal to have 12 and plus 1, so 13 councillors. My reason for that, 3 things I just want to outline. First of all, Māori representation at the table is currently, there's talk around that being limited to only 1 seat. In actual fact, there is not any limit to how many Māori would like to put themselves forward for election for any of the other general seats. So in actual fact, the ideal that the Deputy Mayor has outlined of co-governance is actually within the realms of possibility if Māori in our community get motivated and engaged in the process, and they can stand in the Māori seats and they can stand in the other seats as well. So it may well be, whatever we choose, there is the opportunity for many of our seats to be filled with Māori representation, and I certainly hope those opportunities are taken up. Secondly, there's been quite a bit of talk about evidence or lack of evidence today. There actually is a lot of evidence around the number of an effective board or council, and it's not 15, it's much less than that. There's some data that suggests 8 to 10, there's some data that suggests 9 to 11, but certainly I think 15 is too many, and there's a lot of evidence that points out the reasons why that's the case, as well as the information from the Remuneration Authority. Third, the third thing I just want to say is the decision that we make today is something that we will then consult on. Our actual final decision is not till September. So I think this is a really good opportunity for us to look at whether the number of councillors is something that we should revisit. And putting a proposal out for less councillors, this is the best time to do that. Otherwise, we've got to wait for another 3 years. There's been a number of really good points made about why slightly less councillors would be more effective, and I support those issues, and I would like to hear from the community and get feedback on that. If we just simply go out with a status quo of 15, then we don't have that opportunity to engage over that issue. So that's why I won't be supporting this option, but I do hope to get the opportunity to second Councillor Michelad's proposal of 13 councillors.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I'm also going to oppose this with the hope that Councillor Michelad's notice of motion will come forward for fewer. I think my very stance here is for fewer. I think it's a better outcome for the city. Let me address 2 issues this time. One is around the Māori ward seat. I see that as still a significant decision that we've made and a commitment to it. But the number of members on the committee is limited because of the Local Governments Commission, the ruling on it, because I'd be happy if there was 12 councillors for it to be 10 general and 2 Māori. I'm happy to stick to try and create 2 Māori, but it has a limitation. So you can't have both if you want to have fewer councillors, which I think ultimately is a better outcome for the city. That's what I'm heading at. That's one point. Second point is, let's use some comparisons. Let's use our regional council, which covers a territory up to Ruapehu, down to Levin and across to Tararua, and it has 12. Am I right? 12 members, fewer. The DHB board I have the opportunity to sit on is 11 members. It covers a similar territory down to Otaki, Tararua, and the Manawatu. Their budget is 10 times the city's budget. The population, of course, takes in that wider territory for representation, likewise with the regional council. So there's many local examples where people have fewer elected members or fewer representatives for them to have representation through for those boards. I don't see the council being any different. We're an outlier. We know that Christchurch is the only one with more members than us, and their population's is it the third largest city in New Zealand? Is it second largest city in New Zealand? And so therefore, I'm very comfortable advocating for fewer members for our city. That's the second point. The other one I will just pick up on, because as a last point and final point, last and final point, do you know that means the same? is the one about remuneration. Look, it's not for us to say that we want more money, not at all. It's to create opportunities for others, like the Deputy Mayor outlined previous debate, around opportunities for others to come through, and we want more people to consider standing, not fewer. And it is a barrier for consideration. And without going into it any more than what was raised, I just want to concur with what was outlined previously on that point. So I'm going to oppose this for those reasons, and would look to the notice of motion to come forward. Thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think if fewer councillors was such a great idea, we might have heard from the community about that, but actually the community is quite happy with the level of service, if you want to call it that they receive by having more councillors rather than fewer. You know, if the only idea was how you could make the simplest decision, you just have one, you know, I mean, that would make it really simple. And, you know, the idea that we should be a small group of, 7 or 8, like if you have a skills-based board, well, I don't quite buy that either. I mean, you can make the same argument about Parliament. Maybe Parliament should only have 7 seats in it because they can make really quick decisions. It's about representation so that we actually have a chance for the community to connect with council and shape and influence decisions. And in a rapidly growing city with a lot of challenges and opportunities in front of it, I think it would be most unwise for us to take a move to cut the numbers at this point. I think this is very much the most appropriate option, obviously, in terms of doing right by our treaty partners, but it's also the right option for the future of the city, and I'd urge you to support it.
Councillor Dingwall.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I won't rehash over all of my previous comments around this, but I will be supporting this recommendation, mainly because I don't see any evidence that shows that having less councillors around this table would be beneficial for our community. And I don't believe that workload is an issue because, as I say, I don't have any workload, really. But if it was an issue, and we had people going to things like conferences and stuff, if we look at the recent conference that 5 elected members went to in Blenheim, right? We had 5 elected members going to a conference in Blenheim. If we'd had less numbers, how many people would be left here to look at the community, you know? So I guess if you're looking at that, I feel that more councillors would give more opportunities. And the whole point of us going down the road of getting Maori wards is because Māori absolutely deserve to be at the decision-making table that impacts their lives. They absolutely deserve to be here. And I know from experience as a Pasifika woman trying to get into this chamber that it is very, very difficult, that there are so many barriers out there for participation in this chamber. And so for me, I would much rather break down barriers for Māori to be able to participate than I would trying to get all of us a bit of extra income. So if it's about trying to get Māori at this table, I would like to see 2 seats, not 1.
Councillor Butt.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I believe majority of us, if not all, want the maximum Māori representation on this table. And at least 2 times, the legislation has been blamed that restricting us getting more Māori representation. So what I would say, the maximum allowance the legislation is giving us is this, what is in front of us. If we if this one fails, there is only one Maori member left, will be left on this table. So I would ask you to support whatever is best available for our Maori representation, number one. Number two, I appreciate Councillor Dennison's argument that different councils having or different authorities having different number. What would you feel if I say Councillor Meehan take his boxer and play a rugby match against Springboks? So every condition is different, every field is different. So you can't serve 15 people with, if you are having less number at the DHB, same number cannot work in the City Council. Same as the rugby match and the boxing match. So every team, every competition is different. Thank you.
Councillor Beattie.
Thank you, Mr Mayor, and I won't go on. I just want to just iterate that from what I said before, I am worried about reducing councillors will not dilute the political alliances around the table, so that's really important to me, that that could have an effect if we reduce councillors. And also I don't think that we'll get the volume of people and different types of diversity standing for council. I think probably my final comment is that I go to a lot of events around the city. I was at an event the other week and I was the only councillor there. I've been to a huge amount of events in the last 12 years, and we are a diverse city, and there's a huge amount of these events, cultural events now, that are becoming, and the amounts that you look in your calendar now and think, oh, I've got this, this and this, I'm having to start saying, no, I can't go to all these things. So with only 13 councillors, that's 2 full-time, I mean, most of us, even though we're only paid part-time, we work full-time as councillors. That means there's less connection to the councillors, and there'll be less of us being represented at events. And more and more we want to be a vibrant city, so I just think you're diluting that representation as well. So that's my final comments. So yes, I will be supporting this.
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Gosh, this gets tricky now, because you all know I think we should have fewer councillors. But I don't think we should have fewer councillors at the expense of Māori representation. And in my comments supporting the original motion, I indicated my discomfort with the proportionality of that representation. And so I have increasing discomfort about the signalled motion coming from Councillor Michelad, which would make that situation much worse. And so I am going to support option A, because it's not status quo. It might be the same number, but the makeup of that will be quite different. That will be 13 non-Māori councillors and 2 Māori councillors. And for me, that is heading in the right direction. I'm interested to hear what our community have to say. I don't want to have the Māori ward debate again, because that decision is settled, but fair representation is what this is about. And I cannot see that having one Māori ward councillor carrying an added weight of more than 25% compared to the rest of the councillors is fair representation. And so I will support with gritted teeth the proposal that is clearly not status quo.
Councillor Michelad.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to speak, arise to speak against this motion in the hopes that I'll be speaking to my recommendation. So a couple of points have been made by a number of councillors, and I think for me personally, they have not been convincing enough. First of all, I would like to reject the idea that, by reducing the size of the council, that we are doing this at the expense of Māori representation. That's absolutely false. Māori representation is not limited, actually. By having a lesser council, or having a 12 plus 1, we have one Maori voice. Yes, and I do acknowledge it. But the thing is, Maori also has a choice to stand at the in general wards or general seats. So we do not do this by us rejecting this. Does not necessarily mean that we are doing this at the expense of Maori representation. And that's what I would probably disagree with. I think, and don't get me wrong, I campaigned on the ethos of my campaign. When I was campaigning, a lot of people asked me about this question, and I was one of the first candidates to actually say, I support Maori wards. And my political values probably do not allow me to support Maori Maori wards, I would say. But in an ideal world, for example, we would not need a Maori ward. In an ideal world, we do not need Maori wards. But we understand that, the world is not perfect, and the past injustices that have happened over the past years do require us to have Maori wards. And I campaigned on it, and I voted for it. And my suggestion is that as we're considering this, in terms of, let me just retract a little bit back. In terms of considering this recommendation, because a number of members have actually said that, by us doing this, we're actually limiting Maori representation. So I would like to say that, that's not true, and but actually allowing us to go for the other way, which is 12 plus 1, which will make us 13. We're actually giving a Maori a secured seat, which is one ward, and also allowing Maoris to actually participate in the at-large and at-large seat as well. So excuse me for the ramblings, but I'm trying to get my thoughts together. But what I'm just trying to say is that, I'm just trying to reject the assertion that, by reducing the size of council, that we are actually doing it at the expense of Maori representation, which is false, and we're actually, by going the other way around, actually Maori have a choice to also stand at the general seat. Thank you.
Councillor Hancock.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. Look, I just really want to make a correction, really. There's been a couple of people have actually said that Māori can stand through the general ward. Our current experience absolutely demonstrates that this does not lead to Maori representation. So the 2 seats is required. Thank you.
All right, back to you, Councillor Johnson, if you need a right to reply.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. I think there's been enough dubious assertions made that I do want to exercise my right of reply. The first one I want to address is the idea, and it came from a couple of councillors, that Māori can stand in a general seat, so there's no limit to their participation in council. That is an absolute pipe dream. It's a pipe dream. You are totally kidding yourself. Look around the table. Do you see any Māori? When was the last time a Māori person was elected to council? I'll tell you, it was over 20 years ago. Because there are barriers to Māori being elected through a general seat. We know that. We accepted that. That's why we agreed to include Māori wards. Māori wards are a guaranteed seat. What we're talking about is guaranteed seats. The electoral option of putting yourself up in a general seat has too many barriers for Māori to be elected. We went through all of these arguments when we discussed Māori wards. And I just can't believe that people are not looking at the evidence in front of their eyes. Just look around the table. Do you see any Māori faces? I don't. And that's because Māori people stand in the general seats every single election and they don't get elected. So it is totally false to say that we can have plenty of Māori people around the table when they're standing in a general ward. That's just not going to happen. It hasn't happened for 20 years, and it's not going to suddenly happen magically next time round either. So that absolutely has to be refuted. The other points that were made about consultation, how we need to get feedback over numbers, we'll be getting feedback over numbers. Whatever number we put out today, we'll get feedback on from the voters. It doesn't matter whether we put out 15 or 12 or 10, in the sense that the number will be up for feedback. So the proposal that we go out with today needs to be the proposal that we think is the best option. People can still give us feedback that they don't think it's the best option, and then if enough people do that, we can change our proposal. But it's no argument to say we need to go out for a proposal with lower numbers because otherwise people won't be able to tell us they want fewer councillors. People can tell us how many councillors they want, no matter how many we go out with. The other comment that was made was around comparison with other councils, and I think Councillor Butt answered this quite well. But basically, Palmerston North is an extremely diverse city. We're one of the most diverse cities in the country. We've got over 130 different languages spoken in this city. It's extremely important that we provide an opportunity for diversity around the council table. And yes, the voting system has a part to play in that. Yes, at large has a part to play in that. But also, the number of seats available has a part to play in that. And if we reduce the number of councillors, it will take a greater number of votes to eject a councillor from their position. Whereas at the moment, it doesn't actually take very many votes to get a councillor elected. And so it presents a more achievable option for people from our variety of diverse communities to stand. So I really don't accept any of the counter-arguments that have been made, but I think the ultimate thing that you need to keep in mind when you're voting here is, what message are you wanting to send to the Māori community? That's what should be on your mind when you vote. Thank you.
All right, we will vote, councillors. It has passed 11 votes for and 4 against. All right, we're through number 6 now. That was a good debate. We're now through to number 7, which is a memo from our governance manager around rotation of trustees on Acacia Birch Trust Board.
Sorry, there's a second recommendation on that item.
Just one moment, I'm just getting some advice here.
Page 23.
Okay, my apologies. We do need to, there is a second part to this, which is hidden on page 53, that number 2, that council places public notice and invites submissions on the initial proposal from 6th of August to 6th of September 2021, with submissions to be heard on the 21st of September 2021. That's been moved. Yep, do you want to move that? That's good. All right. Do we need to speak to that? No, I didn't think we did. All right, we will vote, please. Councillor Naylor. That has passed 14 votes for, none against. All right, we're back to where we were. Number 7, rotation of trustees on the Acacia Birch Trust Board. There is a memo there from our governance manager, Hannah, on page 131.
Just a few points to make before I leave it to you. When this report was published, trustees raised some concerns with us, which I'd like to share with you, particularly around the use of the term resignation in sections 1.2 and 2.2. So I'd just like to confirm that officers received written advice from the two council-appointed trustees that they did not wish to continue and they do not seek reappointment post the AGM. So just wanted to clarify that. And also to note in 3.1 it should read a maximum of 8 members. So that would be 5 council-appointed members and 2 co-opted, but you are able to have up to 6 council-appointed members. Final point that I'd like to make is in the recommendations to council there, number 2, you have 3 options there. Just to note, we did seek further legal advice on the second option in number 2. So that's the option that council agree to continue with 3 trustees. Just the legal advice that's come back is that there is a legal risk there, that any decisions or changes that the trust board made in the next period of time until it comes in-house could be open to legal challenge, simply because you'd be operating outside of your deed.
Okay, thank you, Hannah. I think that last point that you made is quite relevant, that the council, I should say the trust board, and then by default the council was at risk with them operating with just 3. That is correct? Or is it just with 3 at the moment?
So the current members are there until the AGM.
Yeah, okay, thank you. All right, I'll open it up for any questions. There is. Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thank you, Hannah. Just reading the report, in 3.1 you talk about council usually appoints. Could the board has always had the ability to second additional members. Could the board second members to fill this gap?
The deed separates council-appointed trustees and co-opted members. So even if the board were to co-opt members to replace those that have stepped down as part of rotation for the co-opted system, you would still be short in the council-appointed space.
And we must have those council-appointed space, otherwise we're outside the deed. Okay.
Correct.
Thank you.
Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr. Mayor. Hannah, has the Trust Board expressed a preference over appointed councillors versus an appointment process?
I'm just looking to my colleague. In correspondence with the Trust Board, the preference was to have 3 and change the trust deed to match that.
Oh, okay. But my understanding from what you've just said is that we can't continue with 3. Well, there would be some risk in continuing with 3. How long does it take to change trust deed and what's involved?
The reason that option is not listed, because you could have a 4th option in number 2, which is this option, is simply that officers felt that it would be a cumbersome process to get through before the AGM. It's not impossible. We'd need to rewrite the deed. It would need to, go back to the trust. It would need to come back to the council. Then it would need to go back to the trust, and so it's not impossible, but it is.
That's why it's not an option.
The process for it is set out in the deed as well, so it would require time and money and...
So just to be really clear, my understanding from what you've said is that your recommendation is either we invite 2 people to apply or that we appoint 2 councillors. Is that correct? In other words, the option that you've given us here of continuing with 3 trustees isn't really an option. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Barrett.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks, Hannah. Just wanted to sort of understand the timeframes here and sort of when options sort of drop off just simply due to time. So if we go down the track of either inviting or doing an expressions of interest process, is there time that if those don't provide us with two suitable trustees, that we could revert effectively to the option one of councillors stepping in?
Just talking off the top of my head and working through the timeframes. So if we went out to advertise tomorrow, then we would go through, we'd need to advertise for a period of time, then we would be shortlisting, interviewing. If there were candidates and they were successful, a report would need to be brought back to council. It'd need to come back in October because Keisha Birch is pushing out their AGM to November so that that person could be in place in time for that transfer.
Great. I think I've heard that.
However, the most recent advertisements for the positions for the other CCOs have just closed, and you'll remember that we were advertising for Globe, Regent, Te Manawa and the airport. Not all of those CCOs received applications, and we know that in the 2018-2020, that's why previously we've operated with less, was because there were not applications and there were not successful applicants. So that is certainly a probability that even if we met the timeframes, that there might not be candidates.
Thank you for that, Mr. Mayor.
Councillor Bowen.
Sorry to pop back in, Mr. Mayor, thank you. I just wanted to follow up on the operating outside the trusteed risk. Can you quantify that level of risk? Is this a significant risk? Is this a very minor risk? What are we talking about?
I'll just jump in here. I think that any decisions made can be challenged, so it could be open to legal challenge and possibly being overturned, which, given the environment that we're, what we are doing with Keisha Birch, I don't believe that's something that we really want to entertain.
So you're saying it could put the decision to bring in-house at risk?
No, I don't think that the trust would actually be able to make the decision to wind up effectively with only 3 trustees.
Okay, thank you.
All right, that's exhausted the questions. Thank you, Hannah. Councillors, I'm going to look to move number 1, that the council resolves to appoint 2 councillors onto the Keisha Birch Trust Board for a term of 1 year ending the 1st of August 2022, seconded by Councillor Johnson. And then number 2, that the expressions of interest from councillors interested in being appointed to the Trust Board be sought and recommendations brought back to council on the 1st of September 2021. If I could just briefly speak to that, I don't think we've got a lot of choice here, and as we know, there was a bit of, how would I say, feeling in the Trust Board, and ultimately having a couple of resignations, I think, sort of signals some intent there. This is the only thing we can do, and I think it would be wise that we do speak to the remaining trustees and speak to them as soon as possible. To go and change the trust deed, I don't think is a very good option. One, it'll take a long time, and it will still leave us exposed. So, councillors, I think this is the only thing we can do, and ask you to support it. Councillor McLeod.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Probably just going to also speak in favour of this, because I think it's a great opportunity for us, especially for councillors, trustees, as has been mentioned in the report. To participate in this, and also in an oversight role. I think that'll be great, also in terms of being able to explain the council's position to trustees and vice versa, so that relationship as well is built. So I think it's a wise, I think it will be a wise decision for us as a council to actually support the motion before us as well. So,
Councillor Bowen.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. Yes, I think you're absolutely right. I know we thought we might be able to get around this in a different way, but we can't, and this mitigates the potential risk that's been explained to us. I probably don't share Councillor Michelad's enthusiasm for the prospect, because I think it does put the appointed councillors in quite a tricky position. It has been our practice not to appoint to our council-controlled organisations. It's actually the advice of the Auditor General not to appoint councillors to outside those organisations for very good reasons, unless in exceptional circumstances. And here we quite clearly find ourselves in what could be the very definition of an exceptional circumstance. So on that basis, I will support it. Thank you.
Councillor Naylor.
Mr Mayor, I'm comfortable with the recommendations, but just would seek some clarity around recommendation 2 in terms of what that expression of interest process would look like, because I don't think that's articulated in the report. So if expressions of interest are sought and recommendations brought back to council, how, if there are more than 2 expressions of interest, how is it determined what the recommendations are that come back to council on the 1st of September?
I'm just looking at the governance manager, but our normal process is it comes back to the Mayor's office, and there's some recommendations made, and either support them or don't support them.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Dingwell.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I do agree with this approach. I think it really is our best option at the moment, mainly because we don't want to put future decisions at risk. And we also don't want to put new trustees at risk by getting them to come in for a 1-year sort of period and having to they wouldn't even be here for the 1 year. They, you know, by the time we go through the recruitment process and then they've come in, they need to have some time to get up to speed with what's gone on and, you know, some of the background documents and things like that. So I feel appointing 2 councillors is probably the best way, because we already have quite a lot of that background. And yeah, for me, it's timing. That's the only thing we can do in the time that we have.
Councillor Dennison.
Thank you, Mr Mayor. I don't have a problem with this. I think this is the best way forward. The only comment I'd bring is that at least 2 and up to 3, knowing that we could go up to 4, and that way there'd be 3 members potentially and 3 independents, and I think that may even create a better balance on the line into bringing it in-house. That's my only comment to add for consideration. Thank you.
All right, just in reply, look, I do think this is around continuing the status quo. It's filling seats, really, in all honesty, and maintaining our legislative obligations. As Councillor Beattie sort of spoke to, I mean, this is really, it hasn't been our practice to do this for all the right reasons, but we are a little stuck here. So it'll be good practice to continue the good work that Acacia Birch Trust Board has done in the past, maintain that through to the transition period. So I ask you to support this, please. That has passed 14 votes for, none against. Okay, we move through to number 8. Again, a memo from our governance manager around the committee chair appointment for the remainder of the 2019-22 term. Hannah, page 135.
I'm happy to take as read and answer any questions.
Okay. Councillor Johnson.
Thanks, Mr Mayor. What skills and experience are considered necessary to chair the Chief Executive's Performance Review Committee?
In terms of the same skill set that all of us have around the table. We're elected, and the person that is in this role needs to be able to interact fairly with the staff member, our employee, and all councillors. And have an understanding of basic law as well, legislation. Are there any further questions? All right. So we've got the committee chair appointment for the remainder of the 2019-22 term. The council adopts the mayor's recommendation to appoint the deputy mayor as chair of the CE's Performance Review Panel effective 1 August 2021. That council makes a recommendation to the Remuneration Authority regarding the elected member remuneration as listed in 3.4 of the report. Committee chair appointment for the remainder of the 2019-22 term. I'm going to look to move that. If I could have a seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Naylor.
Thank you. Just a small observation I'd like to make in terms of the process around expressions of interest. In relation to the last paper we just had, it was clarified that that expression of interest goes through the Mayor's office, and it appears in this report that 2 members submitted their expression of interest to the Mayor, and we have a recommendation in front of us. I guess I think it would be a preferable process for any expression of interest process to involve a wider range of elected members in determining the recommendation than simply one elected member. I know that's not the subject of this report, but I just thought I would take this opportunity to make that point. I think it's a very difficult environment to debate one elected member over another elected member here in public. So I do think the pre-work before the recommendation comes to in a report should be a little bit more robust.
All right, councillors, if you could vote, please. And that has passed 11 votes for, 1 against and 2 abstentions. All right, we move through to the scheduling of additional council meeting, and again a memo there from our governance manager, page 139. We'll take it as being read. That scheduling of additional council meeting, the council schedule a council meeting for 9 a.m. The 18th of August 2021 in the council chambers. And look, I'm happy to move that. If I could have a seconder. Thank you, Councillor Micklard. I'll open it up for any comments. Councillor Bowen.
It was a question really, Mr Mayor. Just according to my diary, that would be a conflicting schedule with Play Sport and Rec. So how are we planning to manage that?
The Chair can
Thank you. We haven't yet had our agenda meeting, so until we were having our agenda meeting, which Billy was online for, we were going to then make that decision about that meeting. So that's why I was going to bring that up as well, Councillor Bowen. So until we'd had that agenda meeting, then we were going to decide. There's one item on the agenda, but we were going to make that decision. The agenda meeting's on the 10th of August. Then we were going to make that decision, but probably it just looked likely that it probably will get pulled. But we were going to make that decision with Billy online on the 10th of August.
Thank you for the clarification.
Yep, so that sort of explains that. Councillor Barrett.
Question as well, if I might, of the officer.
Yeah, sure.
Great, thank you. Thanks, Hannah, for the paper. Just wanted to clarify my understanding in section 1.3, where it says the additional meeting is needed for council to consider weightings before determining the best option. So I'm just trying to understand the decision process that's envisaged around the BPO as it relates to that sentence. So will this meeting just be the weightings, or will it be the weightings and the determination of the best option?
It's my understanding that determination of the best option is to go to the 1st of September council meeting.
Okay, right, thank you, that's helpful. Thanks.
All right. Okay, councillors, that's exhausted comments, questions. We will vote. Thank you. Passed 14 votes for, none against. Right, just around our number 10, which is our council work schedule, page 141. That council resolves to receive its work schedule dated August 2021. I'll look to move it. A seconder, please. Thank you, Councillor Hancock. Are there any questions to staff on that? There being none, we will vote, please. That has passed 14 votes for and none against. Councillors, we do have some minutes to pass, which was my error when we passed the earlier Part 1 minutes. The Part 2...
They were, no, that was included in the recommendation.
Oh, was it?
Yeah, it was public and confidential.
Can you just show me that? Sorry, we're just checking that we have actually passed them. You don't need to leave, Janine. Yes, we've passed them. Thank you. All right. I'll declare the meeting closed. Thank you very much, everybody, to our officers and councillors. We'll break for lunch. We've got a councillor only at 1 o'clock, and there is a briefing after that from our colleagues from Horizons. So we'll see you back in the Missoula room